the king who walked into darkness and found redemption. What if I told you that the most wicked king in the Bible became one of the clearest proofs of God's mercy? That the man who drenched Jerusalem in innocent blood would one day kneel in tears, forgiven by the very God he had rejected? This is the unbelievable story of King Manasseh. Introduction: the flames of betrayal. The night air over Jerusalem flickered red. Flames from pagan altars rose high, painting the sky with the glow of rebellion. The cries of mothers echoed to the narrow streets, each sob a reminder how far the holy city had fallen. At the heart of it all stood a man who had once been a child of promise. King Manasseh, son of the righteous King Hezekiah. But now, he was known as the cruelest ruler Israel had ever endured. He had sacrificed his own son to foreign gods, spilled the blood of prophets, and filled the city with idols. No one could have imagined that this man would ever change. And yet, God's story is rarely what we expect. Long before Manasseh's heart turned to stone, his story began in light. In the palace of his father, a man of faith, the boy who inherited a kingdom. King Hezekiah was one of Judah's most faithful kings. He had torn down pagan shrines, restored the temple, and brought the people back to worship the one true God. But when illness struck and death crept near, the king wept before the Lord and was miraculously granted more years of life. It was during those final years that his son Manasseh was born. When Hezekiah died, the boy was only 12, too young to carry the weight of crown, and far too young to face the whispers that soon filled the royal halls. Strange men, advisors from distant lands, began to circle the young king like shadows. They spoke softly of ancient powers, of hidden gods that could make him greater than his father ever was. And little by little, curiosity became fascination. Fascination became desire, and desire became the first crack in a heart that once knew the truth. The kingdom mourned the loss of Hezekiah, but few noticed that while the people wept, the seeds of darkness had already taken root in the palace. The first order. It began with a single decree, one that would send shockwaves through all of Judah. The altars of my father shall rise again, Manasseh declared. Stone by stone, the idols that Hezekiah had destroyed were rebuilt. The smoke of forbidden incense rose once more over Jerusalem. And as the priests of the Lord cried out in horror, the young king smiled, believing he had found freedom, when in truth he had only forged his first chain. Night after night, strange rituals filled the palace. Music unlike any heard in the temple echoed through the corridors. Whispers of foreign names, chants of power, and the scent of sacrifice filled the air. Jerusalem, once the light of the nations, was now cloaked in darkness. The prophet's warning. One night, as thunder rolled across the heavens, an old figure stepped out from the shadows of the corridor. His hair was white as snow, his eyes burning with divine fire. It was the prophet Isaiah, the very man who had once guided Manasseh's father. Son of Hezekiah, his voice thundered. The cries of the innocent reach heaven itself. The Lord will not remain silent forever. The young king trembled for a moment, but pride drowned out the warning. He shouted for his guards to seize the prophet. Yet Isaiah's words lingered, echoing in his mind like a storm that would not fade. That night, unable to sleep, Manasseh wandered into the royal library. There he found the scrolls of his father's reign, stories of miracles, answered prayers, and a nation blessed by obedience. For a brief moment, his heart softened, but then the whisper came, cold and cunning. Your father was weak. You could have everything he denied himself. Anger replaced conviction. He ordered the scrolls locked away in the palace dungeons, and the light within him grew dimmer still. The shadow over Jerusalem. Soon, the signs of divine warning began to appear. Stars falling like fire, storms that refused to end, a city trembling in fear. But Manasseh's heart was hardened. He built new idols even within the temple itself, placing foreign gods in the Holy of Holies, the most sacred place on earth. Jerusalem, once known for its prayers, now reeked of burning flesh and incense to demons. Families who refused to bow to false god were banished, imprisoned, or slain. The city of peace had become a city of blood. And still, Manasseh thirsted for more. Power had become his god, and it demanded everything. But deep within the heavens, A reckoning was already being prepared. The same God whom Manasseh had rejected had not yet finished writing his story. The Living Prophecy, Part 2, Body Section. The winds of the wilderness carried a strange silence that day. Elisha followed closely behind Elijah, his mentor, his prophet, his father in the faith. Every step stirred the dust of destiny. For Elisha knew, deep down, that this would be the final journey of the man who had called down fire from heaven. "Stay here, Elisha," Elijah said softly as they approached Gilgal. "The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha's voice trembled with resolve. "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." And so they went on together, the journey of separation and loyalty. From Gilgal to Bethel, then to Jericho, and finally to the Jordan River. Each step became a test of loyalty. Along the way, the sons of the prophets whispered, "Do you know that the Lord will take your master from you today?" Elisha only nodded. His eyes were fixed ahead. He would not let grief or doubt turn him aside. At the Jordan, Elijah took his mantle, the rough, weathered cloak that felt the fire of Mount Carmel, and struck the waters. The river parted, the earth trembled, the air grew still, and the two men crossed over on dry ground. "Ask," Elijah said, turning to the young prophet beside him, "what may I do for you before I am taken from you?" Elisha's heart pounded. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elijah smiled. "You have asked a hard thing. Yet, if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so." The fiery assent. Then, as they walked and talked, heaven interrupted earth. A whirlwind tore through the sky. Chariots and horses of fire appeared, blazing, roaring, alive with divine energy. Elijah was lifted into the heavens by a storm of flame. Elisha cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen." And in that instant, Elijah was gone, vanishing into the whirlwind, swallowed by the light. All that remained was his mantle, fluttering down through the air like a falling promise. Elisha picked it up with trembling hands. The fire of one generation had fallen upon another, the first test of inheritance. The Jordan River still flowed before him. The same waters that had parted a moment ago now waited silently. He stood alone. Would the God of Elijah answer the cry of a younger and proven prophet? He lifted the mantle. His voice rang out, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" He struck the water, and the river divided once again. The sons of the prophets, watching from a distance, fell silent, awestruck. "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha," they whispered. The torch had passed. The prophecy lived on. The double portion begins. From that day, Elisha's life unfolded like a living continuation of Elijah's, but magnified, multiplied, filled with new depths of grace and power. He purified the waters of Jericho with a bowl of salt. He called down judgment upon those who mocked God's prophet. He filled a widow's jars with endless oil. He raised a dead son of a Shunammite woman. He made poison stew safe to eat. He fed 100 men with a handful of barley loaves. And through it all, he carried not only Elijah's mantle, but his faith, his fire, his vision. Yet even with miracles, Elisha's journey was not one of pride. He walked in humility. He wept. He wrestled with the same loneliness Elijah once knew, because prophetic power was never about spectacle. It was about relationship. God was not found in the wind or the earthquake or the fire, but in the gentle whisper that still spoke to his servant's heart, a living continuation of heaven's work. Each act of Elisha reflected an echo of Elijah, but with a deeper touch of mercy. Where Elijah called down fire, Elisha brought restoration. Where Elijah confronted kings, Elisha healed nations. One was the thunder, the other the rain that followed. Their stories together form one continuous revelation, that God's presence doesn't end when a man is taken. It continues, flowing through generations willing to listen, to serve, and to carry the mantle forward. Even the name Elisha means God is salvation. And through him, the people of Israel would see that salvation was not just a rescue. It was a relationship, foreshadowing the greater prophet. Centuries later, another would walk these same lands, one who would multiply bread, heal the sick, raise the dead, and part no river but death itself. Jesus Christ would embody the full measure of that double portion, not just the power of Elijah and Elisha combined, but fulfillment of what they both foreshadowed, the coming of heaven to dwell among men. When Elijah ascended, one man received the Spirit. When Christ ascended, the world received it. And just as Elisha cried, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" we too can cry, "Where now is the Spirit of Christ?" And heaven still answers, through those who dare to believe, to pick up the mantle and to walk forward in faith, the living mantle. Today, the same choice lies before every believer. Will we stand on the banks of our own Jordan, holding the promises of those before us, and shrink back? Or will we strike the waters and move forward, trusting that the same God who parted the river then can make a way now? Elijah's departure was not an ending. It was a beginning, because the prophecy still lives. And the mantle is still falling, waiting for someone willing to reach out and take hold. The living prophecy, Part 3, conclusion. The wind had long since calmed. The river once divided now flowed peacefully again, carrying the reflection of a quiet sky. Elisha stood by the water's edge, the mantle resting on his shoulders. But this time he didn't look upward. He looked forward, for the mission before him was not about what had been, but what was yet to come, the weight of the mantle. It's easy to imagine that miracles come with excitement, that carrying the power of God would feel glorious. But for Elisha, the mantle was heavy, not in fabric, but in meaning. Every village he entered whispered Elijah's name. Every miracle he performed reminded him of the one who had gone before. He had not only inherited a double portion of power, he had inherited a double portion of responsibility. You see, when God passes his purpose from one generation to another, he doesn't just give ability, he gives burden, the burden to remain faithful, the burden to stand when others fall, the burden to speak when silence feels safer. And that is what Elisha carried, the hidden fire. Years passed. The young prophet who once followed became the one others followed. The student had become the teacher. The servant had become the voice of God to kings and nations. But even prophets grow weary. Even those chosen to see heaven's wonders face moments of deep weariness. In quiet moments, Elisha must have wondered, was a fire that took Elijah still burning here inside me? And each time, heaven answered not with thunder, but with faithfulness. The miracles continued, not to impress, but to remind. That same spirit that once carried Elijah away was still here, walking beside him in every act of obedience. God never abandoned his promise. And that is still true today. When kings forgot God, years later, as Israel drifted deeper into rebellion and idolatry, Elisha's voice became the last echo of truth in a darkened land. Kings consulted him out of desperation, not devotion. Armies sought his counsel not because they loved God, but because they feared defeat. Still, Elisha obeyed. He prophesied deliverance for Jehoram, victory for Jehoshaphat, mercy for the widow, and healing for the foreign commander Naaman. He was proof that even in a nation that had forgotten God, God had not forgotten his people. The shadow of mortality. But prophets are mortal too. The one who once watched Elijah sin would one day face his own end, not in a fiery chariot, but in quiet illness. Scripture says simply, Elisha had become sick with the illness of which he would die. And yet even on his deathbed, kings still came seeking him. "Father, my father," the king cried, the very same word Elisha had once shouted to Elijah. The echo of history had come full circle. Elisha, the man who inherited the fire, now prepared to pass it on once again. He gave one final prophetic act, a symbolic call to strike the ground with arrows, to declare victory over Aram. But when the king struck only 3 times, Elisha wept, because he knew that half-hearted obedience leads to half-lived victories. Even in death, the fire lived. Elisha died and was buried, but the story did not end there. Years later, during a battle, a group of Israelites hurriedly threw a dead man's body into Elisha's tomb. The moment the body touched the prophet's bones, the man came back to life. Even in death, the Spirit of God was still working through him. The fire that fell on Elijah, that burned through Elisha, refused to be extinguished, because this was never about 2 men. It was about a living prophecy, a divine truth that cannot die, the eternal pattern. Elijah represents the power of heaven descending. Elisha represents that same power continuing on earth. And together, they point toward Christ, who brought heaven down and then poured his Spirit out upon all flesh. Elijah was taken up. Elisha carried on. Christ ascended. And now we carry his Spirit forward. The pattern remains. Heaven gives. Earth receives. The fire falls and the faithful carry it. The mantle today. So what does this mean for us? Those who walk not in the deserts of Samaria, but in the chaos of modern life? It means that every believer stands in their own way beside a river, a place of decision, a line between the past and the future. The mantle is no longer a piece of fabric. It's a calling. It's the whisper of God that says, will you carry my presence into the world? You don't need to be a prophet to pick it up. You just need to be willing to forgive when it's hard, to believe when it's dark, to love when the world grows cold, because that's how the fire lives on. The Spirit still falls. The story of Elijah and Elisha reminds us that God never leaves the earth without witnesses. When one is taken, another rises. When one voice grows silent, another is awakened. And the Spirit that once split rivers still splits hearts open, pouring in grace, courage, and faith. The question is not whether the fire still falls. It's whether we're standing where it lands. The living prophecy lives on. The heavens may seem silent sometimes, but the same God who called Elijah in fire and met Elisha in quiet faithfulness still moves among us. Every act of kindness, every word of truth, every tear shed in prayer, these are modern miracles. These are the echoes of a kingdom still advancing. Because the prophecy never ended with Elijah or Elisha. It continues in every life touched by the same Spirit. You are not just a listener to the story. You are part of it. The mantle has fallen at your feet, and heaven waits for your yes. Closing reflection. Maybe today, as you hear this story, you feel the same tension Elisha once felt, the ache of loss, the weight of purpose, the uncertainty of what's next. If that's you, remember, you don't need to see a fiery chariot to know God is near. Sometimes his presence is in the stillness, in the whisper, in the quiet assurance that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. The fire has not gone out. It's waiting for those who dare to believe again. So take the mantle, step into your Jordan, and watch what God will do through you. Because the living prophecy still burns.